Eurocentric view, that Europe was the finishing school. That's where we really became human. It wasn't in some backwater area like Africa, for example. And in 1863, Thomas Henry Huxley wrote, "It is quite certain that the ape, which most nearly approaches man in the totality of its organization, is either the chimpanzee or the gorilla." And you can see little outlines there of human and ape skeletons, and you can see that there is a striking resemblance between them. The differences being related really to locomotion, and that we walk most of the time on two legs, and they walk on four legs. To Darwin and Huxley, this meant that they had a common ancestor. The reason that animals look alike, the reason that dogs and wolves look alike, is because they had a common ancestor, not because they developed these features independently. We look like the African apes because we had a common ancestor with them. And Darwin, in his next major opus, which was published in 1871, called The Descent of Man, wrote, "In each great region of the world, the living mammals are closely related to the extinct species of the same region." And he said, "It is therefore probable that Africa was formerly inhabited by extinct apes closely allied to the gorilla and the chimpanzee." But then he made the giant leap and said, "And as these two species are now man's nearest allies, it is somewhat more probable that our early progenitors lived on the African continent than elsewhere." This is one of the aspects of the theory of evolution. And what we mean by theory is an explanation that is so profound, so robust, so explanatory, that one can use it to make predictions, like the theory of gravity, for example, that allows people to get satellites into orbit, that allows us to get the Mars rover onto Mars. And it's just the same with any theory, such as the theory of evolution. You can make a prediction, and that prediction can be tested with discoveries. So in the light of a Eurocentric view of the origins of humankind, Darwin and Huxley in the late 1800s decided that Africa was the place because that's where our closest living relatives would be found. And they thought, as Darwin suggested, Africa, the dark continent as it was called because so little was known about it, was the place where people should look for answers. These predictions were made way back in 1863, 1871, and it was predicated to, as you know, to a large extent on the similarities between us and the apes. We now know from the work of Jane Goodall, who has the longest enduring field study of primates in the wild, that chimpanzees not only have a resemblance to us, or we have a resemblance to them, but they act a lot like us, or we act a lot like them. They share a lot of the same emotions of disappointment, despair, of fear, of unhappiness and so forth, of joy and pleasure and so on as humans do. There's a range of emotions that we see not as sophisticated and developed and elaborated as among ourselves, but certainly features that identify us with them. We know that biologically they're very similar to us in their bone structure. We know now from the DNA projects, the Genome Project. I was just at the National Institutes of Health for Francis Collins, a friend of mine, the man who sequenced the human genome. We talked a lot about this at this conference, that people have now sequenced the chimpanzee genome, and there's about 99% identity. So it means that that identity was not individually, independently evolved. It was something that was evolved from a common ancestor, and today there's no question that these two creatures are closely related to one another. I see you recognize it. Well, in 1924, this cheerful guy down here, Raymond Dart was an anatomist at the University of Witwatersrand. restaurant, it's a mouthful, in South Africa. I was just in South Africa in November and saw this specimen for the umpteenth time. A little baby skull that was found in 1925, or 24, and was published in 1925 as Australopithecus africanus. This is South African ape. And apparently from the structure of the base of the skull where the spinal cord comes out, Dart could tell that it walked upright like all of us. So therefore, it belonged on the human family tree. But it had, even at the age of 4 years old when it died, a very small brain, a somewhat projected face, as you can see here, and that he called it something we as scientists don't like to use, but he called it the missing link. And what people mean by a link is something that has features of its ancestry and something that has features of its descendants. So the features of the descendants were upright walking, and the features of the ancestors were small brain. And this was essentially the launch of paleoanthropology in Africa, the launch of looking for early human ancestors, and most importantly, in 1924, it was the vindication of those prescient words of Darwin and Huxley that Africa would prove ultimately to be the crucible, the cradle of humankind. Southern Africa dominated our interest and discoveries of human evolution until 1959, as I said, when I was a 16-year-old. And the late Lewis and Mary Leakey pictured there found this large skull at Olduvai Gorge. How many in the audience have been to Olduvai Gorge? Has anybody in here been to Olduvai Gorge? No, there's a hand right there. A couple of hands. See, people have been there. And you can go there. It's a fabulous thing to do. It's one of the things you should put on your wish list in life. Going to Africa. It's always great to go home. Go to Africa, you have a sense that you've been there before, which your ancestors have been. And you go on safari and see fabulous animals, and lions, and leopards, and cheetahs, and giraffes, and you can walk to Olduvai Gorge, walk down into Olduvai Gorge in the Great Rift Valley of Tanzania, where Lewis and Mary Leakey made this discovery, and see the spot where paleoanthropology got its initial spark in eastern Africa. The Rift Valley is traditionally one of the most beautiful geological structures on the face of the earth. It is the result of a tectonic tug of war. The chunk of Africa is pretty stable, but the horn of Africa is slowly moving away. And you can take a beam, like this little laser pointer that I'm using. They have big, powerful ones, and they can shoot them across these large valleys in Ethiopia or northern Kenya, and it's moving about 2 centimeters a year away from Africa. So this tectonic tug of war has developed this almost dueling scar on the face of the earth called the Great Rift Valley, where you see lakes and rivers and the escarpment here, extinct volcanoes in the background. And this has become a very important natural laboratory for scholars like myself and others to find remains, fossilized remains of very ancient human ancestors who were kind enough to fall into these lakes and become part of the fossil record. Someone asked me what I wanted to do when I die. What happens with my body? Well, I don't think I want to be thrown in the lake and become fossilized, but I do have plans to be skeletonized and put in my laboratory in a box next to the Lucy skeleton. But as macabre as that may sound, here is the Great Rift Valley. It runs from Mozambique in the south up through Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia. That's charming. And that may be me causing that. And this is a very obvious geological structure. It's of utmost importance to geologists because it really is a place to study continental drift. Remember, there was some strange guy back in the early